For over 40 years, the Sundance Film Festival has been held on the traditional and ancestral homelands of the Shoshone, Paiute, Gojute, and Ute tribal nations. We do land acknowledgements to recognize the traditional stewards of this land and our 500 years of resistance to ongoing colonialism. But can we acknowledge the land without listening to the land? Take a moment to really listen. From the Ute to the Wet'suwet'en, from the Anishinaabe to the Kingdom of Hawaii, indigenous nations all over the world understand that the land does not belong to us. We belong to the land. And we continue to fight for her. Let this land acknowledgement move you beyond symbolic recognition. Let it be your call to action. Support indigenous resistance. Join us in the fight to protect our mother, for our human and non-human kin, for the next 7 generations.
Welcome, everyone. Thank you for joining us for this last installment of our big conversation series that's been running throughout the festival with panels and other special events. I'm John Nine. I'm a senior programmer here at Sundance, and I'm here to introduce you to an incredible group of storytellers and scientists that you're about to meet for this conversation, Machine Yearning. This is a conversation that I look forward to every year. And this year, I thought it would be interesting to put a focus on robotics and artificial intelligence as we see them in film and television. There's clearly been a resurgent interest in robotics in the last few years. It felt very much part of the moment this year in literature and film and television. But in truth, it's been part of our media culture from the beginning, and it's a way that storytellers have asked questions about science and technology, about human nature and society through stories of artificial beings. But maybe the real reason is that for those of us who grew up with a sense of wonder around science and fiction, robots are cool. And not just on screen, but in the completely fascinating work that scientists are doing in so many fields of engineering and computer science and neural networks and robotics. So that work feels very much in dialogue with the imagination of storytellers in some really interesting ways, and that is why we are here. A few words of thanks before we get started. First to our 2 ASL interpreters, Sarika Mehta and Selena Flowers, who you will see alternating on screen. Also to Glenn Please, Kim Moran, and the entire Sundance team who produced these events. And most importantly, to our partner now for 20 years in bringing forward meaningful stories of science and technology, the Alfred P. Sloan Foundation, we're really grateful for their support of the film prize that is given out each year at the festival, and for the projects, supportive projects in our artist development programs and labs. So to say a few words about that, I'd like to pass the virtual spotlight to the Vice President of Programs, Doran Weber. Welcome, Doran.
Thanks, John. Hi, everyone. It's great to be here for our 20th year at Sundance. Of course, none of us is literally at Sundance this year, but science and technology are bringing us together in virtual space. Science and technology have also developed effective vaccines and treatments at record speed that will hopefully allow us to get back to Sundance this time next year and back to normal a lot sooner. Now, science technology will enable us to present a video about our program. Please roll.
Our universe began with a bang. Then Earth formed, and life came. 3 billion years later, that life would lead to humanity. Humans developed tools and trade. They painted cave walls and told stories around a fire. This was the beginning of both science and art, of civilization. Science and technology enabled us to understand nature and to build on it. Art and the humanities allowed us to express our deepest feelings and thoughts. They were two sides of the same human impulse to survive and thrive. But as art advanced and science became more powerful and specialized, the two cultures diverged. This polarization continues to pose a fundamental challenge to modern progress. For more than 2 decades, the Alfred P. Sloan Foundation's Program in Public Understanding of Science and Technology has worked to bridge the divide between these two cultures. We bring science and the humanities together by empowering creators, writers, directors, playwrights, and others to tell stories that inspire appreciation for scientific discovery and its multifaceted human dimension. Sloan has supported thousands of books, screenplays, films, radio segments, TV shows, plays, and various media from operas to virtual reality that make science more accessible and showcase the pioneering human stories of scientists and scientific achievement that have shaped the modern world. Sloan's exceptional grantees demonstrate what's possible when scientists and artists come together. They dramatize tales of great breakthroughs and tragic failures, as well as the benefits and costs of such endeavors. Their stories promote progress in human knowledge, inspire the next generation, and spotlight the people often left out of the history books. Because before Neil Armstrong could take his giant leap onto the moon, there was a young woman in Virginia who did the math to put him there. As civilization continues to advance, we'll need both scientists and artists to speak a common language and meet new challenges together. Because science is a primary engine of human progress. It touches every part of life on this planet, from our food and water to our climate and health. And it results from human curiosity, benevolence, and ambition. Now, more than ever, we must support artists with a moral, human-centered imagination to portray the complex and far-reaching role of science and scientists in the world, so that we may apply the deepest and most fundamental human knowledge for the betterment of all.
Thank you. So as you saw from our video, we have a nationwide program to support artistic works in many media about science and technology. And we've had many successes, from Hidden Figures, which started as Sloan Book Grant, to an unknown author, Margot Lee Shetterly, in 2013 and became an Oscar-nominated hit film, to Don't Look Up, which won our Science and Cinema Prize at SF Film this year, and may or may not win some Oscars, but provides a surprisingly accurate portrait of science, though not climate science. For the filmmakers out there, we have 6 screenplay development partners, and you can get multiple grants from us, so send us your best stuff. We're especially proud of our pioneering partnership with Sundance and hope you'll join us for an awards reception following this panel that will include screenwriting prizes for 3 exciting new works, as well as our Sloan Feature Film Prize to Kogonada's After Yang. The program for this year's Sloan panel says that cinema's fascination with robots and machine learning goes back almost as far as cinema itself. And among many reasons, this is because robots raise the fundamental question of what it means to be human. Where is the dividing line? Where would you be without your smartphone today? Looking back at our 20-year partnership with Sundance, we can trace this evolution even in our own list of feature film prize winners at Sundance, from Sleep Dealer and Robot and Frank to Marjorie Prime and After Yang. Sloan has supported other works on this subject, from the book Our Robots Ourselves to an art exhibition called Uncanny Valley to the film's Father of the Cyborgs and Werner Herzog's upcoming documentary Theater of Thought, which shows how neurotechnology is on the verge of invading the human brain and turning us into unwitting cyborgs. Lots of food for thought here. Thank you again to all our friends at Sundance, to our panelists, to all of you for tuning in. Hope you enjoy the 20th Sloan panel. Thank you.
Thank you, Doran. Appreciate it. And just a reminder that you're all welcome to join us for that reception. We're going to tell you how to do that at the end. Very quickly, I would like to introduce our group of scientists and storytellers and thank them for their time. You're going to see their extended bios on the description page, but to briefly bring them, I would like to first, I'll just bring them all on. There's Cynthia Brazil, who's a pioneer in the field of social robotics and human-robot interaction. She founded and directs the Personal Robots group at MIT Media Lab. Lisa Joy is co-creator, co-showrunner, EP, and a director of HBO's Westworld. And she recently made her feature directorial debut with Reminiscences. Kogonada is a Sundance alum. His feature Columbus premiered here in 2017. He's returned this year with a mesmerizing film, After Yang, premiered in Cannes and will be released shortly by A24. Ashley Lawrence is the VP and Distinguished Scientist at Microsoft Research. Before that, he was the founding chief of the Intelligent Systems Center at Johns Hopkins Applied Physics Laboratory, and he is also a hip hop artist. And lastly, with extra thanks for leading this conversation, Gadi Schwartz is correspondent for NBC News. He's the host of Peacock's The Overview, which focuses on paradigm shifts with innovation, science, and culture. He's the co-host of NBC's Snapchat show, Stay Tuned. Thanks, Gadi, and I will throw it to you.
Hi there. Hi, everybody. So excited to be joined by such an incredible panel. It is a rare treat to have both the people that are on the cutting edge of science right here with those that are pushing us to imagine what kind of future we can have. And it feels like, I don't know about you guys, but it's starting to feel like we're finally living in the future, and that is a wonderful thing, and also sometimes an alarming thing. So I'd love to kick it off with just a real brief sharing from the panelists of when they first remembered seeing a robot on screen and what their perspective and perception of that robot was. Starting with you, Cynthia.
So my first experience of seeing a robot on screen that really moved me was when I was 10 years old, and I was seeing, the original Star Wars. And, back in the day, those of us who can remember, I mean, the excitement and the length of lines, I mean, it was like truly a cultural phenomenon. And as a girl at 10 years old, I fell in love with those droids, R2-D2 and C-3PO. And basically, I can tell, a story looking back that says I grew up to basically found this field of social robotics, which is basically to really try to advance the science and engineering of building those kinds of robots in the real world.
That is as lasting of an impression as you can get. Lisa, how about you? Do you remember the first robot that you saw on screen and what you thought of it?
Gosh, I don't know about the first. I know I was really moved by Iron Giant when I saw that portrayal of a robot. And I actually didn't watch the original film Westworld until after doing over a season of the TV show Westworld. But when I did see it, I was struck by Yul Brynner's interpretation of the character. And they're kind of both sides of the spectrum, right? A really helpful, good robot versus a destructive killer robot.
And you, Kokonada?
Yeah, it probably was Star Wars or Voltron or some, anime. But yeah, I think maybe the first time I felt really moved was probably the original Blade Runner, and where I felt very emotionally connected, maybe even like finding myself falling in love, with one of the robots, or just this idea that there is this that they weren't just other. I think my early impression, obviously as a child, was that they were just fantastic and other. And then, when you started seeing some of the films where there was real conversation and the possibility that they had feelings that were similar to humans, that started another phase of contemplation.
It's so funny because there are different generations, right? There's the Frankenstein generation, then there's the Star Wars and the Star Trek generation, then there's like the Terminator generation. So it's so fascinating how all these different generations see robots. Ashley, where do you fall in all of that?
I guess I'm in the Star Trek, Star Wars generation, as you characterize it. Really fond memories of watching Star Trek: The Next Generation in particular, and Lieutenant Commander Data. And he was always fascinating to me as an example of an embodied robot, in the way that he was a kind of seamless member of the team, a collaborator. But then the other reference point from Star Trek is the computer. And I always just interested in the omnipresence and kind of the situational awareness that the computer had of everything on the ship, and how that was a kind of extension of the awareness and intelligence and ability to reason and make decisions for the crew. So those are two reference points for me.
Got it. And it's funny because so much of our understanding of robots and AI comes from the media, comes from culture, and comes from what we see in film. And it's a lot of times it's just framed as zero sum, right? Like you either have robots that are going to help you or robots that are going to destroy you and bring about the end of humanity as we know it. So I want to start with the scientists here. Do you think that's a fair characterization, just given everything that you see day to day?
Do you want me to jump in?
Yeah. Go ahead, Cynthia.
So, I think as someone who works on these technologies for a living, I think a lot of us come to it with a sincere desire and belief that we can bring a lot of good through these technologies, that there are a lot of really challenging problems we face as society, and we see opportunities to invent and innovate to help bridge those gaps or to help make those opportunities possible. And, robotics and AI, I think are very much, originating from that. As time has, more recently gone on, what we've just become to recognize and realize is that there can be unintended side effects or consequences of how we train and design these systems that we didn't appreciate maybe as deeply as we should have before. So, now we know a lot about how bias can be incorporated into machine learning algorithms if the data set is not vetted to be equitable and fairly representing people and so forth. So I think, this notion now of responsible AI, ethical AI is really gaining steam, and it's just showing a maturing of the field and the appreciation that as these technologies actually come into the world and interact with everyday people, we just have to be much more carefully mindful about how we design these technologies, how we consider equity, how do we consider how these technologies empower others, and just be mindful of the unintended side effects that we can identify them early and address them. So I think that's kind of the state of how I think about the field today and how it's been evolving.
It seems like that line between helpful and something that could end up having unintended consequences and possibly harmful in the future must change day by day. Ashley, is this something that you see as well?
Yeah, absolutely. Love the comments from Cynthia. In my view, artificial intelligence only exists to augment and extend human intelligence. I like to think of intelligence as the ability to kind of set and accomplish goals. You can think about goals for an individual, in work or in play, or even goals for a society, or goals for a planet. I think one of our challenges now, to complement and augment some of the previous comments is how do we specify those goals? How do we come together as organizations, as society, as a planetary species, and really start to understand what it is we want to get out of artificial intelligence? Again, at an individual level, at a societal, at a planetary level, to improve sustainability, for example, environmental sustainability, or the resilience of our society and the ability to react to disruption. What we've learned in recent years is that machines, through machine learning, are very good at optimizing goals that we set, assuming we have data sets that can support that learning. And one of the fascinations for me is what goals are we seeking, and how do we specify those goals in a way that optimization really results in what we're looking for and mitigates unintended consequences.
Do you think it's important for film to sometimes raise the alarm flags or the red flags when it comes to how far things could go in, an unethical robotic future?
Is that a follow-up for me?
Yeah.
I think it's, I love the opportunity we have in art to explore, both utopian and potential dystopian outcomes or unintended outcomes. I do think when the art that we make is somehow grounded in the realities of technologies, the maturities of technologies, the potential, the grand challenges we have left, I think that can really help. As I've interacted with filmmakers, I try to, there's a desire to kind of explore these dystopian futures. And so I try to maybe help work, co-create to point those in directions that I think are very meaningful. Sometimes I feel like we over-index on some kinds of dystopian examples, like Terminator, for example. I think that's a good long-term thing to try to mitigate, but in the nearer term, I think we can learn a lot from exploring, kind of dystopian outcomes associated with unintended consequences, potential misuse by human beings, ways in which people use technology for nefarious intent or with misguided intent. So I think I'm particularly interested and fascinated by scenarios that explore those things.
That's one of the,
If I can just add, I think a challenge of art is to continue to challenge us to think differently in ways that are really, important and timely to the way we're living now, the way we think about the past, and the way we envision our future. I think, the story of AI and robotics, I mean, it has literally been around since ancient Greece. We talk about Hephaestus and maidens made of gold. And this concept has been around a very, very long time. So the challenge and the opportunity to continue to use this as a storytelling vehicle to encourage us to think differently, to challenge ourselves. I mean, I think that is the opportunity and the value of a lot of what I get out of these films.
One of the things that I love the most about this panel is we're talking to both Elisa and Kogonada, who have kind of gone the complete opposite of that trope, and their robots are the types that show us a lot more about humanity. And Lisa, you have some characters that are robots that you root for more so than you do the humans in Westworld. So I want to ask, do you see a future in which robots are the protagonists, or do you see a future where we descend into this this kind of hedonistic society that is dependent on robots?
Those are the only two choices, because COVID has really tapped down hedonism. We're pretty much all just quarantined here. I think the reason why so much fiction anthropomorphizes artificial intelligence, gives them a sort of human body and face and affect, is because we're really examining human nature itself, less so than robot mechanics a lot of the time. Because I think implicit in that ever since, like, Frankenstein and any meditation on an AI is actually a meditation on the forefathers of AI, which is humans. And oftentimes these tales serve as cautionary tales about what could possibly be wrong or short-sighted about humanity in the design of these robots, and I think even the idea of artificial intelligence, that's a slippery slope, right? Are you guys talking about, human-looking robots, robots that are sentient, simply machine learning? Where does, complex algorithmic behavior and sentience begin? Because if what we're thinking about is AI a threat to humans, then, demonstrably, yes. It doesn't look like Dolores or Maeve right now, but you could write a kind of little bit of code that would inundate people with different types of news or manufactured news, and you could change the entire current of civilization, And so I think, AI is probably more insidious in its dangers than what some fiction has led us to believe in its reliance upon the sort of personification of an AI.
You say could, and yet the things that you're describing there sound like they're exactly what we're seeing day to day. It almost feels like, it's funny because Westworld, you've got these people, these humans that are not thrust, they volunteer to go into this park. And yet when we step back and look at 2022, you're talking about computer codes. And it seems like, especially during the pandemic, we are all living in this walled little garden surrounded by algorithms that are giving us like one or two choices. You do this or you do that. You feel angry or you feel frustrated, or you feel, happy or tired. And so the question is, as you guys have spent so much time trying to think about the future and to think about robots, and a lot of times we focus on the face of that robot because that's what we do as humans. But it sounds like what you're saying is maybe the focus should be on like these systems that we're building, these algorithms and this AI that.
I'm saying our robot overlords are already here. They are in our midst, and we use them every day. I mean, to your point, what you were saying, I think it's fascinating. The park of Westworld is here. It's just not like Disney World. It's an online space. It's a digital space, and we all go onto it, and that's how we hear about our friends, and we hear about news, and we completely obscure and probably aggrandize the details of our own personal lives. The fabrications of, self-storytelling and the stories that we receive have all these narratives now. You don't need to go to some place like Westworld to be told a yarn. You just need to log on.
And then we have the juxtaposition of After Yang, which I found so refreshing because it didn't have any screens. It didn't have technology that looked like technology or how we think of technology. And the aesthetics were such that it brought about this tranquility. So Kogonada, I got to ask, so many people are envisioning a future where it's just, we're almost like plugged into this neural net. And yet you had a peaceful, tranquil, I would imagine, suburban America that you depicted, and yet the robot was right there and almost a part of the family. How do you see the future developing?
Having a lot of tech that was invisible was both a fantasy, something that I long for. I'm not a Luddite, but the presence of it, and the wires and the monitors and all of that was something that, that we wanted to envision a different kind of future. But just to piggyback on what Lisa is saying, I think, which is so significant, that it really is technology that's so invisible to us that we ignore, and it feels like water to us. And I think it's a lot easier for us to address like robots as threats, that would make, in some ways it's more comforting. But I do agree that this kind of our daily activities and how much AI we're interacting with, but that we don't have access to is really an important conversation. But in my film, the other thing that and I love the opening film on the indigenous population, and it's funny because then right following that was a film on technology and science, and both of these things we value and wrestle with. And in my future, we already had imagined almost a post apocalypse, that there was a catastrophe that had sort of humbled humanity, and it was no longer technology in opposition to nature, but that there was a real necessary reconciliation that was a part of our environment. So we kind of reset humanity in a way that they had already been deeply humbled, but they weren't willing to, let go of technology, but that they had to kind of address a necessary balance, to sustain, to make the life sustainable in some ways. So that is part of the explanation of kind of the way we presented our world.
And that came through, I mean, Yang's demeanor, and it's often, that we think of robots completely opposite, but he was like the essence of peace and tranquility, and he was soothing. So I guess the question is, I keep thinking about the opening of that, of your film, and there's a moment where it almost feels like everyone's kind of rushing him to take this picture. And he's like, just a second. I don't want to read in too much here, but is the future you're envisioning one where the robots have to help us say, like, hold on, like, just a second, let's like live in these memories here, or the robots can help us be more human?
Well, part of that question about being more human is, there's this dialogue where, the father asks, because it's this question that I think in film and AI is always asked, which is, oh, did Yang want to be more human? And the response is like, no, like, what's so great about being human? That's such a human question to ask. And I think one of the things, because I was always I struggle as a human being. I have I've had existential angst since I was a child, and I still haven't come up with any real answers that, and there's something about the idea that, is there another kind of being other than the human being that we have to contend with, but not in a necessarily like oppositional way, but what does it mean to exist? And once you're on and you have some kind of consciousness, you are a being in this world, and I think humans are uncomfortable with the idea that they're not the central being in this world. And so, yeah, it wasn't so much like centering humans, although obviously it's a big part of this film about what it means to be human. But I wanted to put it in relationship to a being that was sort of content in its own ontology, its own purpose. And so, yeah, I don't know if that's an answer, but.
No, that's an answer that elicits the existential question of what do you think it is to be human? What is it that differentiates us between something we can create artificially?
Yeah, I mean, I don't know. I was thinking about I think the thing that has always comforted us, to go back to like a Star Trek presentation where it's like Kirk and Spock, and it's like, and this whole idea, Spock wasn't necessarily a robot, but we have this idea that humans will always triumph because we have that thing, we have that instinct and something that will always put us ahead of anything, other. And there's a question. I mean, I think the reason why AI feels like a threat more than ever is because, we've created something, I had the fortune at Cannes to talk to some real AI researchers, and they were talking about when the AI won in Go, this idea that this was going to take years for any computer to be able to beat these masters of Go. And they were just all dumbfounded. Like, chess made sense to them, how the computer was winning, but there was this move called the God move that they could still, like, they're still processing. Like, when that move happened, everyone was just befuddled. They just thought, oh, this is a glitch. This was a bad move. And it turned out to be this move that beat the humans. And now we're in this era, as we all know, that we've created this thing that can surprise us in the way they strategize. And it's not just data processing. It's a kind of intelligence that we're still trying to process. And what that means, in our relationship to that, I think is fascinating. And also, we have been the primary beings of this world. There are other animals that are also quite intelligent, but we have sort of constantly imposed our power. And this idea that we might be creating some other entity that is besting us in ways that are not just data computation, but in ways that are creative, in ways that are almost feel like instinctual. Yeah, I have no answers, by the way. I'm just, struggling with it myself.
It's so fascinating. And the way that you describe AI, that's kind of a concept that is difficult for a lot of people to conceptualize. But when it comes to like a robot face, you kind of either trust a robot or you don't trust a robot. And one of the things that I've found fascinating is that all of the characters from Maeve and Dolores to Yang, obviously you guys have had somewhat of an advantage because those are actual people, very talented actors who are playing them that have mastered all of the micro expressions that humans make. And so even though they may have their ticks that they throw in for the performance, at the end of the day, they're humans. And so when we watch them, we can trust them as kind of humans. However, in the industry, from what I understand, you've got this uncanny valley effect. And I'm not sure if everybody's familiar with the uncanny valley effect, but I know that has been a very large valley to cross for those in robotics. So I was hoping that Cynthia and Ashley, you guys can just briefly tell us what is the uncanny valley effect and how close are we to making robots that have the facial expressions of Yang and Maeve and Dolores?
I think we owe it to ourselves to hear from Cynthia on this one first.
So I'll give a quick introduction to the concept of the uncanny valley, and then I will directly question whether our goal is actually to build human-like robots at all. So the uncanny valley, it's really a conjecture. It's not a proven theory, but it's conjecture that you have this kind of curve that as you get more human-like in features, there's a certain amount of appeal to that. So like cartoon characters and dolls and things like that. But then you get to this point where you are pushing up against looking like human, behaving like human, but you're not quite there, and it's creepy. So like if we think about the state of the art of, say, computer animation, like around early Pixar, right? We weren't quite past the valley. So like, the early Pixar, the famous Babe with the concrete diaper and all of that. That was the case where we were at that kind of creepy valley. But then later, years later, the Pixar characters, clearly you could tell they weren't human, but they were aesthetically pleasing in their own right. So computer animation, I think, has kind of gone and navigated that valley. Robotics, I would say, has not yet. It's just really challenging to build mechanical systems that can move with the subtlety and finesse of the human face. But all of that said, I think there's been this sort of assumption that building something plug compatible to human is the goal. And I just don't think it is, in my field. There is a branch of robotics called android robotics, where, that is about building robots that actually look like people with hair and skin and all of that. But I think a lot more of us are interested more in, there are these important and, fascinating complementarity and the differences, obviously, between what machines can do and what people can do. And the opportunity is really about how can we, as a team, as collaborators, do more together, achieve more together than we could either as just kind of the AI machines or just as people. And I think it is really exploring that relationship. That's where we're at right now. And a lot of my work, I'd say part of what's so fascinating about being in this field now is these systems are coming into the world. Like I have, built robots that live with people in their homes, and we're starting to really try to understand what is the real relationship and interaction? I mean, given by today's technology, but we're starting to actually try to understand that from a scientific and human-centered design perspective. And that's new and exciting. But again, I think a lot of this needs to be done with, a responsible mindset. I can tell you, just as Lisa was talking about through social media and AI algorithms and, manipulating, what we think and do based on the news that we get and so forth. I build robots where I'm trying to build systems that help us achieve deeply personal goals like learning or being healthier or more emotionally resilient. So it's kind of it's a double-edged sword. Like, we can be persuaded, we can be shaped by these technologies in all kinds of ways. And so, right now I'm an academic. So a lot of what I'm trying to do is educate people. We call it now AI literacy, because they need to understand what these technologies are, how they work, the influence they can have on us, so that everyone can participate in that conversation about how we want to live with these technologies. But right now it's kind of the people who understand AI and design it, often controlled by corporations, and then everyone else. And we need these communities to come together, and we need much more diverse communities to be the ones designing these systems, because the field is, as you probably know, it is not diverse at all right now. So we need to change that as well. So as an educator, I've been doing a lot around, teaching kids about AI and social media, teaching them about deep fakes, teaching about, generative adversarial networks and their ability to create pretty compelling, creative digital media. It's like, again, it's both sides of that. And at the end of the day, we have to empower ourselves as people. How do we want to use these technologies in our lives? It's up to us. It's not like the AI is making these decisions. We are making these decisions. So we just need to be much more mindful and thoughtful about those decisions.
Ashley, how about you? Do you think that it is prudent for us to even try to build robots that have facial expressions like us and relate to us on that human to human level?
Yeah, I couldn't agree more with Cynthia that I think mostly when we approach the design of AI or robotics, we're looking to help human, users, human beings accomplish their goals and to have the machine somehow be useful in that. Most design situations that I've been exposed to, creating a human-like machine is not the goal, but creating a machine that's a good collaborator. There's challenges in this, as was pointed out. Human intelligence has certain strengths and weaknesses. Machines that we know how to build today have strengths and weaknesses. Humans can make irrational choices, when faced with uncertainty and risk, as, for example, behavioral economics teaches us. When faced with risk, we tend to overweight or place overemphasis on rare occurrences. Should a robot make a decision that's optimal, or should it make a decision that's human-like and perhaps irrational in some way with respect to a design goal? It was brought up earlier, this notion of the superhuman Go player that we've seen in the God move. So imagine now that this is a safety critical situation where the computer is advising you. And the computer, in analogous to what the superhuman Go player does, is to look, many, many moves in the future, far, far beyond what you could do. And then, one of the things we struggle with today is explainability with respect to these kinds of algorithms. And so the advice is to make this move that seems completely stupid right now, but trust me, it'll pay off 100 moves from now. And the computer advises you, and that's the collaboration. We have a trade-off to make there, right? Between, quote unquote, trusting the computer and its view of the future and its evaluation of the possible decisions versus our human context and ability to reason about that space. So there's some real interesting conundrums that come up, in the design of collaborative computers. And, to the point that was made, I just want to really foot stomp this point. I mean, this is a society-wide conversation. We really need a much broader and more diverse coalition, really helping to shape the way forward. I love, Cynthia mentioned the work with students. I do think it's great to inspire young people to think about these things. Another point of intersection that I feel really passionate about is between the tech and policy communities, right? I mean, that's just a super important intersection right now. I think as technologists, we really need to understand how to translate some of these conundrums and how to illustrate, what the art of the possible. And in the policy community, again, I mean, we really all have a shared interest in that community making choices that are grounded in the realities of the technologies. So yeah, we just, I think, and that's where these kinds of intersections, like the conversations like the ones we're having today, can be so helpful.
Yeah, Lisa, one of the things that was captivating about Westworld in the later seasons is this idea of this greater AI that seems to be controlling all of society. And like we were talking about, as we start looking around and we realize that we are literally surrounded by algorithms that are just getting so good at predicting our behavior, you have to stop and wonder, wait, what are the ethical ramifications of not like the robots that look like us, but the ethical ramifications of AI that is recognizing patterns within us and setting up these systems, and eventually like playing Go and possibly being programmed to make a decision on whether to protect itself from humans or not protect itself from humans. So I guess when it comes to those ethical choke points or those problems that we may encounter, I want to get the creative vision from Westworld to kind of guide us through. What do you see as the biggest places we need to be having these ethical conversations? Is it AI? Is it the future of warfare and autonomous drones? Where do you get alarmed?
I mean, I've been alarmed for a little while now. So, I mean, look, when you're looking at the danger of AI, I think it's important not just to think about how sophisticated AI is, because it is sophisticated, right? Once you have machine learning involved, then essentially you've created your own deity, right? Something that you can give in your prompts and it will return an answer that might be the right answer in Go, but you have no idea how they got there. So your actions when reliant upon an AI become faith-based, much like, people used to look to oracles and signs from, the gods. So we've basically created our own deity. And when I say we, I don't really mean, all the people that you see every day on the streets. I mean, at this point, mostly corporations, right? And so the goals of those deities will be set by specific voices with specific drives, whether it's, capitalistic market rates or some kind of government work, some kind of propaganda. That stuff isn't that challenging. Like AI can do that already. And so we're not only looking at what makes AI sophisticated, we also have to examine ourselves and human nature and say, where aren't we as sophisticated as we like to believe? How hackable are we as a society or as an individual? And I think the answer is pretty hackable. And so in some ways, like all myths about gods, where humans go wrong is hubris. We think that we are stronger, wiser, and less corruptible, less influenceable than we are. But we haven't really looked at all the externalities that are involved and all the ways in which by launching something like this, you're setting a sequence of events that will very quickly kind of outpace what your own mind is able to fathom. So, I think regulation on a government level, on an international level, hopefully, would be advisable. I've been sadly disappointed by when Facebook was kind of under trial, by the difference between what technology companies are able to manipulate and what government regulators and politicians are able to understand. It's like, the whole disrupt culture of Silicon Valley could very easily disrupt a more entrenched, less technically savvy culture like politics in DC. And I think that's very, very scary. I also think it's really easy for tech companies or different programmers or entities to go rogue. It's you can't really completely regulate what people are designing in their basements. And so, that's something to think about. Should there be safeguards against that? Should there be an AI that is a kind of monitoring, policing entity? And then if so, who polices that? Who designs that?
It's kind of sad to think of the types of people that get stuck in misinformation loopholes, and a lot of them are propagated because of these particular algorithms. I don't know if I have too much faith in regulation coming to the rescue right now, when we seem to have lawmakers on an international scale that aren't necessarily too familiar with how coding even works. So my question for the artists here is, do you see art having a role in trying to keep some of this, some of these systems and keep the perspective on the ball when it comes to society and all the distractions we see? Kogonada, that's a perfect question for you.
I think, at its best, art can present questions. The significance of science is, it feels more critical and vital than ever. But the role of art, I don't think, for me, I'm never interested if art is trying to propagate some idea in its own right and just be used for some message without any sort of complexity but I do think in probing and questioning things about society, about humanity, it's why art exists. I think Lisa again has made so many great points, and I think this idea, obviously so much of tech is driven by the military industrial complex, is driven by the corporate complex. So it has an incentive. That's kind of the technology that's getting advanced. It's often about control, power, or profit. And then we're trying to figure out how to utilize it. And that's something that we should, obviously, technology, the driving part of technology is not often what's good for the public, what's good for humanity. There are other questions being asked, and then we're trying to respond to it. And I do think art can then question those things. And I also wanted to go back. I thought you said this thing about creating AI that is more human-like, and the uncanny kind of quality of that. And what I find that is really interesting is how much humans are feeling more comforted as being more AI-like. I probably the future is more in this sort of a metaverse space where we all have avatars, and increasingly people are using these social media filters, and they are more comfortable as presenting themselves in a more perfected way that has its own uncanny kind of quality to it, as human beings kind of filter themselves. And even, my youngest is a huge anime fan. And in that community, people are trying to be more anime-like, and they're recreating themselves in these sort of artificial ways. And so the question I have is I love this idea of machine yearning, but then that's also kind of countered with human emptiness. We have so much discontent. Why are we, even though that there's all this sort of reason to not expose ourselves to these bots and all of the kind of privacy issues, we nonetheless every day find ourselves giving ourselves into this environment. And part of it is back to this existential question that I have is, the way in which this is constantly driven is by our own discontentment of what it means to be us, what it means to be human. So we are constantly vulnerable to what is being offered, to be other, to be more, and that's where I think you had asked this question about Yang. Is he helping this family become more human? I do think that there's this question, of whether it's a machine or our own, encounters, can we create art that helps us recenter ourselves, to try to find out what is meaningful in our lives, not just to distract us from the emptiness, but to really suggest that there's possibilities that can feel meaningful, so we're not so vulnerable to this other thing and exposing ourselves constantly to corporate incentives. So I think art really can play that role in this larger conversation.
It's funny because we've got four players. We have the military and their work in robots, and then we've got private sector, advertising, attention economy, and they've got their systems. And then we have art, and then we have academia. I guess, Ashley, I hate to put you on the spot, but right now, in that development sphere, who do you think is winning? Who do you think has the most developed systems?
I think maybe there's a follow-up question there. What do we mean by winning in this context?
It's part of me. It's my human instinct to, it's either zero sum. Somebody's got to be winning. But the question is, who's got the best technology? Is it corporations? Is it academia, or the military?
Yeah, that's interesting. So, previously I worked at, in the space where I was looking at AI and robotics to develop systems for kind of open world and less constrained use cases. So I was working in the field of underwater robotics for a while. So you would try to make an underwater, I guess, quote unquote, drone, if you will, or robot, smart enough to be on its own for a long time and make intelligent decisions relative to some design goals, maybe even come ask for help when it needed it. Be disconnected from a human operator for a long time. So driven by those kinds of use cases, I think a lot of the, kind of government funded research is forced to consider use cases where you can't control the environment the way you can potentially in a commercial use case. So in that respect, I think, that community has experience considering those kinds of systems and dealing with the kinds of open world challenges that result. We even look at space exploration. How do you build a robot on Earth that generalizes to the environment on Mars or on Titan or something like that? So oftentimes, in that sphere, you're dealing with uncontrolled scenarios, open world, or even open universe types of concerns. One of the things since being in the private sector has been super interesting to me is these large-scale machine learned models that are trained on these massive corpora of data and can learn in a self-supervised way and just require this massive infrastructure. So we're talking about machine learned neural models that have hundreds of billions or more parameters, and there's a very rarefied kinds of infrastructure that can create models like that. And those are being prepared and leveraged for more commercial use cases. So I guess and those are doing things like, generating language with, causing humans to be able to interact with models in new ways, translating among, 100 languages or something like that in this kind of universal translator kind of way. So I don't know that there's a single kind of goal to all of this where you can say one is winning and one is not. I think, spurred by different motivations and different kinds of use cases, you're seeing different sorts of specialties emerge in these different areas.
Cynthia, do you agree?
Well, I would say in academia, as in contrast to being in industry or within an organization that has a more specific kind of mission-driven focus, academia is really, remains a bastion of creative, curiosity-driven inquiry. So I think a lot of the really brand new ideas, especially if they're not on a more kind of obvious for-profit path, are more likely to happen within academia. There's just a lot more freedom, intellectual freedom to explore and understand. So, do they have the same resources as a huge company to then bring that to scale? No. So it kind of depends by what you mean by who's winning. Is it about scale and impact? Probably not academia. Is it about intellectual creativity? I think academia still has an edge there. So again, it kind of depends what you mean by winning.
Well, let me ask you this. One of the, as a layperson, it would seem as though one of the danger zones for AI is, I guess, teaching self-preservation to some sort of AI system. When it comes to military application and possibly some commercial application, is there a danger there in teaching an AI system some sort of self-preservation, and are we getting close to that that area in development in some of the things that you've seen?
I think it depends what you mean by self-preservation. I mean, there's a lot of research in just best engineering practices on building fault-tolerant systems, right? So it kind of means, I guess the question is, what do you mean by self-preservation, and what are the levers you grant the technology access to in order to promote that self-preservation?
And that's kind of the question that starts at the beginning of every like post-apocalyptic movie, where it's like something in space. It's like, oh, well, you know, I have to teach myself how to survive in this space environment, so I have to make these real world decisions. And the next thing you know, it's like, you know, the moon is a harsh mistress just launching rocks at Earth. So you look down the way and you see that possibility on the commercial side, if you have a vivid enough imagination, and also the military side. So just, is that a rational fear? Do you see that could be on our horizon, or are there enough checks and balances when it comes to the ethical ramifications and regulation to stop that from happening?
So
it's a very don't look up question.
Yeah, I mean, I think the question is, within these different kinds of organizations, how is accountability monitored? I don't have deep insight across all those organizations, how those things are monitored and accountability is held to. I think with any of these questions that you're raising, it's worth considering it, absolutely. You know, I think one of the things about AI that's so fascinating, in some ways we're very far from the science fiction systems that kind of capture imagination, but if you take any kind of certain question around, you know, creativity, can machines be creative or not? Can they do X or not? Like, you find it's not a binary decision, but it's probably actually more of a spectrum, right? And machines are kind of in a certain region of that spectrum. Animals might be in another one. People might be another one. So it's never a really cut and dry sort of proposition. But I think any of these things are definitely worth consideration. Now, how advanced or principled we are in addressing them, I can't comment on that.
Ashley, do you have any insight into whether we have enough checks and balances to prevent some sort of really scary scenario?
Yeah, so it's a hugely important question, and there's aspects of this question across the full technology life cycle, right? From the system design to the test and evaluation, which is actually a really hard problem. You know, in AI and robotics, all the way to the policy choices on when and how and where to use a certain system, and assessing the competency of a system that's been learned or trained. So maybe I'm admiring the question, but it is a question all the way down from the fundamental technologies to, again, the T&E, all the way to the policy. Again, kind of the test and evaluation question. I have a machine. It's got some components in it that have been machine learned, others that have been programmed explicitly. You know, a lot of times fail-safe mechanisms and things are more so programmed explicitly than they are learned. How do I now, test and evaluate and verify that system, when presented with previously unseen scenarios in the real world, is going to generalize to those scenarios and perform as I think it will? That's actually just a really tough technology question. That's right at the frontiers of what we know how to do. And so again, a lot of use cases, then we try to constrain not only the system, but the ways in which it's used in the environments in which it's used, because we don't know how to get that very general, any scenario you put the system in, it does the right thing. So again, it's a fascinating question. It's an important question. And it really spans the whole life cycle for technologies that we develop and use.
I have no idea how time is flying so fast, but Lisa, I do want to ask you the same question that we asked Kogonada. What do you think it is that makes us human, and what do you think it is that would separate us from something that we could create artificially?
Okay. I think, we spent a lot of time thinking about this in Westworld, clearly. And, I think the typical way that people consider consciousness is, can you make a mental model of yourself in a sort of paradigm in which you understand your own situation vis-a-vis the world, and you can also see yourself in that kind of meta paradigm, right? And so that kind of awareness is where some people draw the line at, like, what sentience is, right? So they draw it that way for animals as well as artificial intelligence. Lately I've come personally to embrace a somewhat different philosophy. I think that for a long time in the tech aspect of it, AI has been, it's about logical thinking, right? You have kind of options, binary options, and you have a logic tree that branches out exponentially, and you make those choices. You run simulations, and the rate at which you run simulations allows you to make very sophisticated choices that the human beings in their own computational powers could not possibly foresee. And so I think that's where AI becomes a threat. But the one thing that I want to separate here is, what is an advanced and threatening AI, and what is a quote unquote sentient AI? One that, forget about having the physical features of a human. None of that matters, right? I mean, we are not very well designed. We eat and breathe from the same orifice. It's easy to get clogged up and die, like just the most fundamental design errors. So we're not really like such great shakes in terms of what we look like. Now, in terms of what we think like, the reason why we consider ourselves to be literally the center of the universe as humans, we tend to say, okay, well, look at what we've made. We make planes and we make buildings, and we can do complex math and physics. And all of that really gives primacy to that kind of logic-brained aspect of human nature, which is interesting for me because a computer, an AI, can be a better logic thinker than a human. We are easily hacked. So then the thing that differentiates humans, if that's what we're going to define as sentience, becomes something maybe a little more elusive, the idea of what some people call qualia, right? The idea that you feel something innate in you. It's not just a response, a programmed response to stimuli. And when you get to that kind of feeling, I start to think of it as a more feminine form of weighing sentience, something about, empathy and natural kind of feelings of love, fear, higher order feelings that are beyond the immediate programmable survival instinct. And so, that might just be for me personally, but it is for me a way in which I've started to think about intelligence on a completely different plane. And it makes conscience a huge part of consciousness and a huge thing for us to protect. And it also, by the way, opens up the feelings on what is quote unquote conscience in the animal world, right? It really changes that math. And all of a sudden, a lot of animals have consciousness.
You kind of scare me a little bit, just because as you're talking, I'm thinking of how I feel when I play like open world games like Red Dead Redemption or Grand Theft Auto or like Zelda, and I get trapped in that area where I'm getting all of the things that I think I'm being creative. I think that I'm feeling empathy towards characters on the screen, and I'm really just in a program tree that is developed by somebody else, right? And so I guess the follow-up question, do you think that some of this technology could possibly allow us to lose what you were just talking about, that essence that might make us human?
Yeah, I do. I mean, this is what I mean by how I think that humans are really easily hacked. And I'll answer your question on in terms of who I think has the most influence in terms of AI. And for me, innovation, brilliance and stuff might come from academia or other sources. But I do think that right now, in terms of mass adoption and societal impact, corporations have a lot of power. Facebook has a lot of power, and power that can run away with itself that we don't fully understand, right? And so when we let a machine that we don't understand create a reality for us, when that becomes our park, and especially in quarantine, we don't go out much, right? Our idea of what the world is fed to us by different technologies. It's a scary proposition because it can start to change our very nature, the very nature of how we relate to each other, how we view ourselves, right? How much FOMO is engendered by, Instagram alone, right? And how does that change our feelings of empathy, kindness, generosity, our value systems of what matters to us in life? I think that's a kind of scary aspect of AI right now. That is, that's for me what's most frightening, right? Like right now we regulate drugs, right? So if I wanted to go on like a huge acid trip, right, I'd have to go through some shady means to get my LSD, and because it's regulated, right? Because the government's like, people shouldn't just be tripping and seeing whatever they want to see in the world, right? Now, think about social media and all of these huge, pervasive, daily used on your phone. So you're like an Android already, just without a really good interface, how that inundates us every day and changes, morphs our understanding of reality. Right? Maybe we aren't having an internal hallucination, but certainly the world presented to us is a bit of a hallucination, right? It's tearing apart the fabric of kind of objective truth, right? And so, I really think that we should probably regulate AI in the same way that we regulate acid, and maybe not let all our kids just get on it all the time.
It almost feels like the early days of McDonald's and fast food, where they're like, yeah, this is great. Look, you have all of your food groups, like eat this, you eat a bunch of this, and it's cheap and everything's going to be fine. And you don't really understand the unintended consequences. I guess the last question, Kogonada, and this is one of the things that really struck me, was your use of Yang's memories and the ability to see those memories. And the thing that scared me the most was that I realized that a lot of my memories are literally like on my phone. Like I start to see pictures that I take as memories. And that opened up this rabbit hole of concern just from watching your film. So my question for you is, do you think that the technology that we're using every day, this is a weird question to end on, but is making us happier?
No. I mean, to go back with what Lisa's saying is, the incentive, the reason why Facebook is so powerful is they are incentivized to make us unhappy, right? I mean, they would never advertise that, but we're going to continue to click if we feel discontent, and they're incentivized to make us more fearful because we're going to click if we are afraid. So their incentive is not like, oh, let's make them happy so that they don't ever need us again, right? So I do think that our technology, if it's driven in that way, is built for us to want to consume more. This is why, maybe this is a good way to end, why foundations and nonprofit organizations that are not so incentivized by those kind of things are vital. That's why art that is not only incentivized in that way feels very vital. And I'll just quickly say about, because, when I had kids, I found myself at their events, like holding this in between my face instead of watching what was happening and to record it. And there was a real moment, and all the parents were doing that. And I just thought, oh my God, I'm never going to do this again. I'm going to just try to recall it and allow my memory to recall it any way it wants. And And one of the things I did in After Yang is that we have Yang's memory, and then we have these humans trying to recall their conversations with Yang. And it's very repetitive, like they're auditioning, they're trying to remember that conversation. Because in human memory, you know, we don't remember it in that concrete way. And I have realized that there's something really beautiful about that, you know, that our memories can sweeten something, you know, as we recall it, and it can help us forget things that we you know, might not want to bring up and know in its concrete way. So anyway, that's it.
This is such a fascinating discussion. I can't thank you guys enough. And I'm hoping that we can continue it a little bit later in that breakout. But John, are we out of time, or do we still have a little bit more time?
We are unfortunately out of time. But I want to echo that, Gadi. Thanks so much. It has been a fascinating conversation. I really want to thank the entire group here for taking the time and encourage everybody to see the conversation as a springboard. You can engage with the work of all of our guests, the scientists and the storytellers, in so many ways. I hope you'll do so. I'm also hoping that you'll be able to stay for the Science in Forum as this Science in Film Forum moves into the Sloan Feature Film Prize reception. You do not need to do anything to do that other than one small click. The link for that reception sits in the chat box to the right of the video, the panel video box on the platform. So please join us there. We're going to start in just a few moments. And once again, thanks so much, everybody, for taking the time. Really appreciate you being here at Sundance Online. Thanks.